Hi, Senior Seminar. Today I'm just going to review um, some of the major schools of critical theory. This shouldn't be too long, definitely not more than 20 minutes, maybe not even that. First, I just wanted to reiterate something you probably know already, but a primary source is the text that you are reading and writing about. So, say if you were writing about passing, that's your primary text. A secondary source is any essay by a critic about your chosen text. Okay, so the critical theories that we're going to recap today are old historicism, Marxism, new criticism, feminism, and cultural studies or cultural theory. So, old historicism is simply looking at the historical context to determine how the historical period may have impacted it. So, knowledge of the historical period can help us get a better understanding of the text. Example with Long Day's Journey into Night, which I think several of you have read. This is a play about a dysfunctional family in which the mother is addicted to morphine. Now, it's set in 1912 or 1913, I'm sorry. And at first, when you approach the play, it may seem kind of like, oh my gosh, because the mother injects morphine. And I can't even think of a contemporary novel where that is the subject. So, learning about drug use at that time period can be very helpful because if you research it, you will actually learn that the largest group of morphine and heroin users at the time were middle to upper class white women, just like the mother in Long Day's Journey into Night. And why was this? Well, because many of them were stuck at home, they were bored, and it was very easy to get morphine and heroin. You could actually order a preloaded syringe from the Sears Roebuck catalog, and they would deliver it to you in a discreet little package, so no one knew what you were getting. In the play, we see that Mary has a script for her drugs, but again, the point is, it was very easy for people to get these, and women were the ones stuck at home, not really welcome in the public sphere or in the work world or in educational settings. So it kind of makes sense that, and also morphine and heroin were very widely prescribed by doctors. They would be prescribed for things like postpartum depression, insomnia, the common cold. So it was very easy to Mary in Long Day's Journey into Night was prescribed for I think is postpartum depression, some condition she had after the birth of her youngest child. So when you learn about the historical time period, it makes sense that Mary is struggling with this addiction because it was actually very common at the time. So, and then old historicism also says that you can learn about the historical period. You can learn more about it through literature. So let's say you hadn't done that research, but you read Long Day's Journey into Night. You could learn, arguably, that this is a picture into life at that time, and this is what it was like for a woman who, an upper white female, middle upper class, who was prescribed heroin and morphine by her doctor when she shouldn't have been, and this is what happened. And you can kind of see her as indicative of a larger phenomena. So you see how the history teaches you about the literature, and the literature teaches you about the history. That's old historicism. So Marxism is a way of looking at literature that reinforces the theory of Karl Marx, or the theories of Karl Marx. So what are the theories of Karl Marx? Well, he says that all of history is a series of class conflicts between the elite, or the bourgeoisie, and the working class. So just stop and think about that for a minute. Is all history, or even if you look around now at contemporary society, do you see conflict between the elite, those at the top, and everybody else, or no? Maybe, because look at what we're going on now with supply chain issues. There are a lot of job vacancies. A lot of employees have, a lot of people aren't wanting to work for little money, doing things that aren't fulfilling to them. And that's a problem for all of us, because, again, the supply chain issues and the availability of goods that we're used to being able to just go and buy. Um, but who has to negotiate that is at the well, I guess it's not the very top. I don't know if that's a good example, but yeah, it is. That's class conflict. So just something for you to think of. Another thing that Marx said that's very important, he said, it is not the consciousness of men that determines their social being, but the social being that determines consciousness. Now, what does this mean? What it means is this. So what you are thinking about is going to be determined by your social status. So let's say that I have food in my refrigerator right now. And let's say I have a year's supply of food and a year's worth of shelter. That frees me to to think about whatever I want. I could start painting. I wouldn't do that. I can't paint. But I could start writing. I could write a book. I could dedicate myself to the writing of that book. However, I don't have a year's worth of free shelter. I don't have a year's worth of food. Those are things I have to work for every day. So my first and primary concern is my survival. So I am actually writing a book, but before I can do that, I have to do what I have to do to survive every day, which is teach, to get paid so I can pay my rent, so I can put food in the refrigerator, so I can take care of my cats, so I can pay for the electricity. So that's what he means. It is the social being that determines consciousness. So it's not, let's say someone who's a rocket scientist or maybe like a painter. It's not that person, I mean, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, the person who is, again, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, let's say the guy across the street from me who, let's say he doesn't have to work because he comes from a wealthy family and he has a trust fund or something like that. He's free to do whatever he wants. So maybe he wants to invent an app. He can do that because he doesn't have to worry about the day-to-day survival. So that was a really important revelatory comment, because up until Marx said that, the belief was that your consciousness determined your social being. So in other words, if you weren't doing so, if let's say you're preoccupied with I don't know, working or maybe less stellar pursuits, it's not because you're a dumb person, or it's because that's what your social class dictates to you. So pretty much our consciousness is dictated, at least temporarily, by our social status, and that would be, of course, unless we can move up. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so for Marx, literature and art are produced by the bourgeoisie or the elite, and they reflect the elite ideals, and they further false consciousness among workers. So what is false consciousness? False consciousness is the failure to see that capitalism is exploitative. Case in point would be American society. Whenever people notice the way people talk about socialism like it's the greatest evil in the world, or Marxism too, like it's the greatest evil, which is just interesting, because Marxists would say, well, that's false consciousness. These people have been tricked into believing that capitalism benefits them, when in actuality it's exploitative. So that's false consciousness. What is an example of a book that you could use to explore Marxism? A great example is John Updike's The Jungle. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we have a family who moves to Chicago from Eastern Europe, and they're all like gung-ho on the American dream, and they all go out and get jobs, and one by one, just tragedy befalls them, and you see that it's pretty much impossible, at least at that time, to make it, to start from the bottom and climb above circumstance. And it's brutal. It's really brutal. The way the family literally gets like chewed up and spit out by the different industries they go to work for, and the ways in which they are exploited. So, new criticism, moving on, new criticism says that this, excuse me, the historical period and the author's life have no bearing on a text. You don't think about it at all. A literary text should be considered like a work of art. So if you went to a museum, you would probably just look at the painting on the wall. You wouldn't stop and say, "Wait, who painted it? Where did she live? What was her neighborhood like? What were her politics?" You just look at the painting. So that's what you're supposed to do with a book. You're not supposed to think about the author's history, the author's biography, the author's politics. You just read and engage with the text. So you can do that really with any book or any work of literature. Moving on to feminist criticism. Moving on to feminist criticism. So this is concerned with the ways in which literature reinforces the political, social, psychological, and economic oppression of women. So an example of this, which those of you who had critical approaches last semester, remember we discussed Kate Millett. So Kate Millett is considered by many to have been the first feminist literary critic. Her writing was influenced by her activism in women's rights and mental health. She was a committee member of NOW, which is the National Organization for Women, a graduate of Oxford University. I went there for a trimester, and a professor at Barnard College, the Women's College of Columbia. So Millett, in her book, Sexual Politics, she analyzes the domination of women in prominent 20th century literature. For example, Henry Miller, Norman Mailer, D.H. Lawrence. She looks at really graphic, she looks at the portrayal of women, and you would be surprised, those of you who haven't read it, the way some of these authors write about women. So Millett argues that the sexual politics, like the literal sexual interaction between men and women, is reflective of the larger dynamics in the society between men and women. And so when she discusses these authors treating women like literal sex objects, or like, I don't even know, like just being exploitative, condescending, not treating them like women, just sexually kind of abusing them, for Millett, that is a reflection of the mentality operating in the larger society. So that's just one example. And how could you apply that to literature? Well, you could look at a work of literature that does contain like a sex scene or sexual interaction between characters, and you could analyze it and in attempt to gain what it says about the larger society. In The Awakening, Edna Pontellier wants a relationship with Robert, and they have a little flirtation going, but then when Robert sees that she really wants to go through with it, he backs away. He is, so you could say that, well, that is definitely reflective of the larger mentality about women operating at the time. So I think it's like she becomes unattractive to him or no longer desirable when he sees that she wants to take it that far, and that's because she's going against all of the values in the larger society. But anyway, so that is feminist criticism, and there are tons of feminist critics. If you would like a different one, just ask me and I can maybe make a suggestion. Okay, lastly, we have cultural studies or cultural theory. So cultural studies looks at cultural phenomena in various societies, and often the focus is on how that phenomena relates to matters of ideology, social class, gender, nationality, or ethnicity. So an example of this that we did last semester would be Pierre Bourdieu. He argues that what we think of as our taste, for example, what I'm wearing right now, the way I'm doing my hair, the way my jewelry is, just the way my living room is constructed, that I may think of this as my taste, but it's actually a function of where I fall on the socioeconomic ladder. And according to him, good taste is the ability to intuit like what clothing is most beneficial to oneself given a particular social setting, or what type of food would be most beneficial socially to the self in a particular setting, what movie, what type of music. So all of those things aren't really developed by us. They're a reflection of where we are on the socioeconomic ladder. And Bourdieu also has a concept called logical conformity, which means that ultimately we all accept our place. So I would be middle class, and the fact that, let's say, okay, the last handbag I bought was not a designer bag. It was not a Louis Vuitton bag. It was not a Gucci bag. It was not a Prada. It was not a Chanel. It was not a Fendi. The reason for that is I cannot afford to spend $2,000 or more on a handbag. I just can't. So I got a bag that was $100. So me, like, for example, not even going to look at Fendi or to look in Chanel because, well, just not doing that, Bourdieu would say, I am accepting my lot in life on an unconscious level. I'm accepting where my place in the world and my position. But it's also important we recognize that he says logical conformity is not something we're aware of. So the way it would manifest is like, again, if I needed a new car, I'm not going to go to the Maserati dealership. Now, or for example, if I go to a restaurant, I'm not going to order the escargot. If you ask me why, I wouldn't say it's because it's too expensive. I would say because it looks disgusting. It's just gross to me. Bourdieu would say, no, it's not gross to you. Somewhere in your head, you know that that is beyond your reach, and you're rejecting it before it can reject you. So if you wanted to discuss Bourdieu or cultural theory, you could look at a book where the characters kind of act in accordance with their expected roles given their social position. So like Edith Wharton, any of her novels, she was of course very wealthy during the Gilded Age, and so she was a member of the elite. But you could also look at something like Maggie, a girl of the streets, where she's at the lower end, and she also behaves in accordance with the expectations for her class. So there are lots of options, but I just wanted to give you a quick brush up on some of the major schools of critical theory. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I will see you for our live discussion on Bordo and the reproduction of the body and the reproduction of femininity.